So my name is Emily Kile. I'm so pleased today that we have Amy Frank from the ALS Association Arizona Chapter. She holds a BSc in Recreation Therapy from the University of Arkansas and is a certified therapeutic recreation specialist. As the Director of Care Services for the ALS Association Arizona Chapter, Amy leads a collaborative effort of ALS specialists who ensure those affected by ALS have access to disease education, medical treatments, and support resources throughout the state of Arizona. She has a passion for designing and facilitating programs to improve the quality of life for people with special needs and medical conditions, and loves living in Arizona, as do I. So I'm going to let Amy start. If you have questions or comments, by all means, just type them in the Q&A or the chat, and I will make sure to keep an eye on that. And with that, I am going to stop talking and I'll let Amy take it from here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Emily said, and part of my introduction was going to be what is recreation therapy, but Emily captured it there a little bit. I have been with the Arizona chapter of the ALS Association for 6.5 years now. And I got there by accident and knew nothing about ALS. And it's kind of a long drawn out story, so I'm going to spare all of you guys that. But what made me fall in love with the ALS Association was that the mission also includes helping people with ALS live their lives to the fullest. And that's where my recreation therapy background came in when I met someone who said, I moved here to Arizona to retire and now I can't, or to retire and to play golf, and now I can't play golf because of this disease. And as a recreation therapist, my brain kicked in and said, you absolutely can play golf, and if you want to, we're going to figure out how to do it. And so that's how I got to the association, and as the Director of Care Services, our chapter make sure that we put a focus on that as well. So thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us today, and we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to cover just briefly what is ALS, and then what the ALS Association, both nationally and locally, what we do. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about local programs and services. And then a little bit about our community awareness and fundraising, and then how anyone who's interested can join us in the fight. As Emily said, please feel free to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat box. I'm very informal and I'd love to be able to address those as we're going through the slides. So don't hesitate to drop those in there. So first off, what is ALS? If you're not familiar with ALS, ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and more commonly known as ALS, and also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that attacks the nerve cells and the pathways in the brain and spinal cord. So there are upper motor neurons, and that's where the nerve cell connects with the brain, and there are lower motor neurons, and that's where the other end of it connects with the muscle. For ALS, if you have PMA, which is primary muscular atrophy, or P.L.S, primary lateral sclerosis, either one of those indicates that there's some disease and degeneration in the motor neurons, either the upper or the lower. And someone is diagnosed with ALS if you have disease and both the upper and lower motor neurons are impacted. I generally explain this to people who are new learning about ALS with the analogy of your cell phone and plugging your cell phone in into the wall. ALS, because those motor neurons are affected, the muscles, all of the voluntary muscles of the body are going to be affected. And that means any muscle that controls the ability to walk, to talk, to eat, to breathe. So all of the voluntary muscles, we don't usually think about it, but the diaphragm is a voluntary muscle. I can hold my breath and make it not work. And I can force myself to take deep breaths. So even though it happens without us thinking about it, it is technically a voluntary muscle. ALS doesn't affect the muscles themselves. ALS affects the plug. If we think back to the cell phone analogy, if you plug your phone into the wall to make it charge and you don't plug it all the way into the wall very well, and if it it moves a little bit, then you may not get a good connection, and your connection to charge your phone will go in and out. So that's where the upper motor neuron is. And the lower motor neuron would be the part of that plugs actually into your phone. And if that also doesn't get a good connection, then your charging capabilities are going to go in and out. And when it's plugged in, it'll work great. And when it's a loose connection, you may not always have the phone operating the way you want it to. It's exactly the same with the motor neurons. So the muscle itself works fine, but there is no electrical, quote unquote, electrical current that's getting to the muscle to make it work. Which is why there is not, physical therapy is not going to help or improve, because the muscle would work fine if there was a way to get the signal to the muscle, and there's just not a way to get that signal to the muscle. Over time, people with ALS will become completely paralyzed, and cognition rarely is affected. So while they may not be able to move any of their muscles, cognitively, they're typically, now there are some cases where frontal temporal dementia, or FTD, is caused by ALS, but most people with ALS, their cognition is rarely affected. ALS is a rule out diagnosis. There is no test that someone can take in order to get an ALS diagnosis. What typically happens is we notice something is a little bit off, and you go to your primary care physician, and eventually, physical therapy didn't work. They send you to a neuromuscular specialist, generally a community-based neuromuscular specialist, and they'll recommend various types of treatments and therapies. And if those don't work, then they'll refer you to an ALS specialist. So the time to diagnosis can take a minimum of probably 6 months from the time somebody starts seeking answers to what's going on with them, all the way up to, I've had, people it take over a year for them to get to the right people and to get an actual diagnosis. And that's one of the things that the researchers are really heavily focusing on, is trying to improve that time to diagnosis and streamline that process so that people are able to get into clinical trials and research and to get on any potential therapies earlier. Couple of other facts about ALS. Every 90 minutes, someone is diagnosed with ALS in the US, and every 90 minutes, someone dies from ALS. So ALS is considered a rare disease because we don't have huge numbers of people who have been diagnosed with ALS. And a lot of that is because of the speed at which ALS progresses. So people don't live long enough as they do with some other illnesses for there to be a large collection of people across the country or across the world that have ALS. The average life expectancy is 2 to 5 years after someone has been diagnosed. We talked a little bit about the challenges with the diagnosis and how long that can take. And then generally, once someone has progressed enough that a diagnosis is able to be made, they generally have about 2 to 5 years left before they'll need to make the decision of whether or not they want to go on advanced life support, or whether they're going to let ALS and the symptoms of it in their life. 90% of cases are sporadic, occurring without any family history. And then we do have about 10% of cases that are linked to genes, and we found genetic links. I think they have mapped 30 genes at this point. And so that's definitely a huge area of research, is that genetic makeup. Generally, when there is a genetic component, it is pervasive in the family. And, after about 2 people, then they start looking for that genetic component and that familial history. Military veterans are twice as likely as the general public to be diagnosed with ALS. We don't have any idea why. The VA has acknowledged that for some reason, there's something connected to military service that increases the likelihood that someone will be diagnosed with ALS. So at this time, ALS is considered a service-connected disease, and the VA does provide some very wonderful, extensive benefits to people with ALS. And so if you know someone who has ALS, it's going to be really, if they're a military veteran, it's going to be very important that they get connected with the PVA, the Paralyzed Veterans Association, because they are the ones who help process the benefits and things like that. The last, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, so there was just one question. It's an interesting one as to whether there's a difference in the diagnosis between men and women in terms of symptoms that are being looked at, time to diagnose, all of that. Very fascinating question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you for adding that in. So we generally see the percentage rates, they're about 60% men, 40% women. So men have a slightly higher diagnosis rate. We don't know why. As far as diagnosis, ALS does not discriminate across socioeconomic backgrounds, race, any of those things. Like it's pervasive throughout, with the exception of the military veterans. That's the only category right now that we can determine, an increase in likelihood of being diagnosed. Go ahead.
I was going to say, is it often the case that between Parkinson's and ALS to rule out one or the other? Are the symptoms kind of similar that it takes some time to figure out which the diagnosis might be?
Yes, it certainly does. A lot of, and several other things. Multiple sclerosis as well is another diagnosis, is another neuromuscular diagnosis that when the neurologists are considering all of these things, those are certainly ones that are more common. And that's why they might start looking for those other diagnoses prior to getting to this one. And when there's not a response to any type of treatment, that's when they say, okay, well, it wasn't this and it wasn't this and it wasn't that. The other thing that's important to note is ALS does not present the same in every single person. The presentations are, and the functions of the body which are affected, eventually over time will most likely be the same for everyone who has an ALS diagnosis, but it doesn't always present the same. Some people have what is called limb onset, so they might start noticing foot drop, they might start having unexplained occurrences of falling. Some people, or they might have weakened hand. I spoke to someone last week who was saying it started with, I couldn't button my shirts. My thumb didn't work right and I couldn't button my shirts, but it wasn't a big deal. And I just assumed it was arthritis that I had been diagnosed with. Or unfortunately, a lot of the symptoms of ALS can also be attributed just to general aging. And so a lot of people don't seek out any sort of answers to the question because we assume it's happening. It's just a normal part of aging. And ALS most commonly strikes in late 50 to early 70 age range, that's when we're also contributing a lot of the changes that we're seeing just to aging. The other presentation might be bulbar symptoms. And it's named bulbar because there's a region of the brain that's shaped like a bulb, and that region of the brain controls speaking, swallowing, and breathing. And so if someone has bulbar onset, they may have noticed their voice change first, or they may have a hard time taking deep breaths, and we may notice respiratory changes. It's still ALS. It just means the bulbar symptoms, it's bulbar onset first, and limb onset versus if it's something in the limbs. It's still ALS, and there's no way to tell how quickly someone might progress, how rapidly the progression of the disease might be. For some people, they are very rapid progressors, and once they start noticing symptoms, it moves very quickly. And other people are very slow progressors. And I have people that I work with who've been diagnosed 10, 12, 15 years without needing, any advanced life support. So it's confusing, and there's a whole lot to learn for people who are newly diagnosed because of the numbers of functions of the body that are going to be affected. And then the other thing is it's expensive. The annual cost of caring for someone with ALS is around $200,000. And so that presents huge issues for a lot of families. Most of the time with ALS, there's not a need for a skilled nursing facility. You don't need skilled care. It requires sort of custodial care and those activities of daily living, which are not covered by your insurance. So most often the caregiving, depending on the family's financial means, most often the caregiving falls to family members, someone who, you know, may be forced to quit work and stay home. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit just about what the association, the National Association, the larger group. The ALS Association is the only not-for-profit health organization dedicated solely to the fight against ALS. There are other nonprofit health organizations that are community-based that include ALS, but we're the only ones who are dedicated solely to that. And our vision is to create a world without ALS, and our mission is to discover treatments and a cure for ALS, and to serve, advocate for, and empower people affected by ALS to live their lives to the fullest. So as I talked about in the beginning and how I got involved with the association, I come from a background where living your life to the fullest and quality of life is what I did and do by profession. And so our local chapter chooses to take that and sort of take that to the next level. I tell families and people who we're working with all the time, I'm not a researcher. I'm not smart enough to be a researcher. I can't cure this disease. What I can do is help people who are suffering from it now have the best quality of life and figure out how to navigate all of the challenges that come with this until the researchers find the cure and put us all out of business. And then we're going to the beach. That's the goal at the end. So the association focuses in 4 areas. Obviously in research, the National Association, the local chapter as well as the National Association put a huge focus on research. We want to end this disease. And the researchers will tell you it is possible and there is a solution and they're working towards it, and they feel very confident that we can get there. And the research since the Ice Bucket Challenge, which was in 2014, research has grown tremendously. And they've made huge strides in, you know, new therapies and new medications being offered, as well as discovering new genes. And there's much more of a global collaborative approach now than there was before. I'm going to skip patient services and talk about education. As I mentioned, because all of the functions of the body are affected, and because it's a rare disease, so most people are not going to work with clinicians who've ever experienced this before. And most people are not going to have any experience with ALS until they're given a diagnosis. We do all that we can to make sure that people understand and have a good education base. And so that's every bit of what we do focuses on trying to educate people with ALS and their families so that they can make informed decisions about their care. And then advocacy as well. So we have a huge branch who advocates on the national as well as on the local level. And what we want to do is make sure that there is legislation being enacted that serves the needs of the ALS community. And one great example of this is if you do not have an ALS diagnosis and you are under the age of 65, if you have a disability, you can apply to go on Medicare, and there's a 23-month waiting period to get on Medicare. For people with ALS, there's a good chance that they will need those health benefits long before 23 months. They need something pretty immediately. Some of them may not even live 23 months. So the association through the legislative efforts, was able to get that changed and reduced to a 5-month waiting period. So on the 6th month, Medicare was able to kick in for anybody who had an ALS diagnosis. And then it had been that way for probably about 10 years. And then this last November, through the advocacy efforts, we were able to get that reduced to a 0-month waiting period. So as soon as the paperwork is processed, someone with ALS, regardless of their age, is eligible to get on Medicare so that they could start receiving those benefits, with the understanding that they're not going to be on it for the 20 or 30 years that someone else might, and they're entitled to those benefits. In the patient services category, we provide community-based programs and services that are free of charge to anyone with ALS and their families. And we understand that ALS is a family disease, not that necessarily everyone in the family is going to get it, even if it's not familial and no one else is going to get it. everyone in the family is going to be impacted by that. And so we take a comprehensive approach to providing care for the entire family unit the best that we can. And we also understand that, you know, if caregivers are trained and educated and supported, then the person who's receiving the care, the quote unquote patient or person with ALS, will have much better care. So we try to make sure that we care for the caregivers as well. So the Arizona chapter is part of we are the local chapter of the national network. There are 39 chapters nationally, and Arizona, our chapter covers the entire state of Arizona. We were founded in 1991 by a group of volunteers who had experienced loved ones living with ALS and said, we've got to come together and help the community. So since 1991, we have provided free education, resources, support, and programs. As I said, we're statewide, so any of our programs and services, we go to where there's someone with ALS. And we focus on patient and family-directed care with a focus on dignity and quality of life. And we serve approximately 650 families each year. Each year, our chapter will have about 150 people who are newly diagnosed. So we'll get an extra about 150 people a year. And we also lose 150 people a year, approximately as well. So we also serve, and all of the chapters across the nation work together to serve people when they're traveling, because we have such a huge population of people who are seasonal and tourist as well. We don't limit, they don't have to be residents of Arizona when they come here. They could still borrow things from our loan closet, or we'll still go out and help them arrange care and things like that as well. So we try to work with their home chapter as well as our chapter if they're seasonal and going back and forth. Do we have another question?
There was a question. You talked about the Medicare benefit, and I know typically you have to qualify for Social Security disability in order to get that waiting period started to get Medicare. So for an ALS person diagnosed with ALS, do they also need to qualify for Social Security disability benefits before they'll be eligible for Medicare, or they're just eligible for Medicare given the diagnosis?
They're eligible for Medicare given the diagnosis. They will still complete. So in order to get on Medicare, it's the same application. It will still go through. It's the same Social Security disability application. But even if they were not working for whatever reason, and I've had a lot of people who weren't working, they were I was a stay-at-home mom, or I retired, years ago, even though I'm under 65. So even if they're not working, and if the ALS diagnosis doesn't require them to stop working, they won't be eligible for disability. So, but they can still be eligible for Medicare.
Okay. And another question came in, which I was Googling on my phone because then it made me think. So somebody asked about Stephen Hawking, who lived such a long life, but when I look it up, it says that it says an early onset, slow progressing form of motor neuron disease, but it doesn't say ALS. Did he have ALS and he just got lucky because he got such a long life expectancy, or?
He did have ALS as far as I know. Now I don't know if he started with P.L.S or PMA and only one end of the motor neurons were affected. That's the hard part. I think that we're so used to saying, doctor, how much time do I have? And there is no way to know that. There's no way to know if my right arm is affected. Is my right leg going to be affected next, or is my left arm going to be affected next? It's completely sporadic. There's no way for them to tell right now. And there's also, as I said, no way to tell, how rapidly it's going to progress. To my knowledge, he did have a full ALS diagnosis, and I don't know at what point he got that, because I do have some people who just have an upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron, and then eventually over time it progresses to be both. The other thing of note is ALS is a motor neuron disease, and internationally, it's referred to as motor neuron disease. It's not referred to as ALS. ALS is a United States diagnosis. So sometimes depending on where someone gets their diagnosis, if it says motor neuron disease, they would be denied those Medicare benefits. So we have to go back to the physician and say, hey, I realize that you studied somewhere else, or that, widely accepted it's motor neuron, but here we needed to say ALS, if that's actually what it is. If both the upper and lower is affected, I need the paperwork to say ALS, or they're not going to get any benefits. So it may be that was just motor neuron was referred to as this in the same, interchangeable. Anything else? Okay. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about local programs and services, just so that anybody listening has a good concept of what the people with ALS in Arizona are entitled to, and how we can be helpful and beneficial to the families that we serve. As I said, each chapter is an independent organization right now, and so it doesn't look the same everywhere. If you go to California, they may have some programs that are the same, and they may have completely different programs. So just bear that in mind, that when you're talking to or working with a local chapter, it may be different. Their requirements for things may be different, or the programs and services that they provide may be different. There are some that are core. So ALS 101 is one of the programs that we run, that we created, and we found to be incredibly successful and helpful in helping people understand what is ALS, and how do I even get my feet up under me, or quote unquote sea legs, so that we can figure out how to live with this. It can be very intimidating to just show up in a support group for someone who's newly diagnosed. That takes a big act of courage, and people are more apt to opt into an education type session, something where they don't have to show up and feel like they have to be able to talk without having emotions, and they can just learn about the disease. And as I said, there's a huge learning curve, and so many things that families need to learn. So we created the ALS 101 class, and it is for people who have only been diagnosed less than 6 months. It's an invite only class when we get people newly registered with us. And we go through everything. That we do a Q&A with a neurologist, so they have time to sit and actually ask all the questions. We do a session about symptom management with the nurse, our nurse educator, who will go through all the symptoms that anybody's having, and how do we address those and things. We do a session with an attorney about paperwork and documentation and legal things that legal considerations that someone who's newly diagnosed are going to want. And then we also have a Medicare specialist that can help people figure out which plan is the best for them, especially if you're under 65 and you're not able to get a supplemental plan in Arizona. Financially, to reduce your exposure, it's better to get an Advantage plan. But not all Advantage plans are created equally. So we work with someone. So we introduced someone who can help with determining their Medicare benefits. And then the last session that we have with ALS 101 is a research focus. We'll bring in researchers. In the Valley, we're very lucky in that we have 3 certified centers of excellence, and I'll talk about what that means in just a minute, a little bit more. But all 3 of those are doing research, and Phoenix has become a research hub. There's a lot of research in the Northeast part of the country, and there's a lot of research hubs in California, and Phoenix has also established ourselves as a huge research hub. So we bring the researchers in and have them explain research and clinical trials. We always need more people to be eligible and to attend and participate in research and clinical trials. When I talk to a researcher, they'll tell you their biggest issue is no longer funding, thanks to the ICE bucket and community awareness and funding. Their biggest issue now is finding participants, people who are willing to enroll and be in it, because there are a couple factors there. One is obviously it's an untried medication or treatment or therapy, so we're not sure about that. But also it's hard to travel and get out and be in those projects. And probably the largest limiting factor to people being in research is that by the time they get diagnosed, they no longer, for a lot of trials, they no longer meet the eligibility criteria, because the time of diagnosis took so long. They're so far progressed at this point, and based on what the trial is, if you can't have any respiratory involvement or things like that, so there's that exclusion criteria that cuts a lot of people out. We also provide monthly support groups. These are in person when we're able to, and we anticipate going back to in person in September. And they're regionally located. And then we also have virtual groups, which we will continue. We were doing that pre-COVID, and we'll continue those because of we want to make sure that we're accessing and providing opportunities for people who live in more rural situations and areas. And also because of limited ability to travel, not everyone's able to purchase a wheelchair accessible van, or not everyone has a caregiver who's able to be home in the middle of the day to take them to support groups. So those will continue virtually. Support groups are open to anyone who has any type, is interested in ALS. So that's people with ALS, their family members, their friends. We have a lot of people whose family members live out of state, but they sign into our support groups as well so that they can be there with their family members. And then we have a couple of specialized groups each month. One is for people who are caregivers. They have unique needs that they're trying to cope with providing for their loved one and be supportive of their loved one, while at the same time they're grieving this diagnosis and what it means and things. So we have a caregiver focused support group, and we also have a support group that's called Page 2, which is for people who have lost loved ones to ALS. Multidisciplinary clinics is another program that we offer and support. As I talked about, that we have 3 certified centers of excellence. Once someone is diagnosed with ALS, the standard of care, the best practice of care, is every 3 months they will go in to see their neurologist and an entire multidisciplinary team. So that will include a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, that will include a speech therapist, a respiratory therapist, a nutritionist. They will also see generally someone from research if they're at one of the centers where they're doing research, if they're interested in participating in research. They also have a social worker and generally a representative from the ALS Association. So someone with ALS and their family will come in for their appointment. They should plan to be there for 2 to 3 hours, and all of those disciplines will rotate through and do assessments and education and make recommendations and check in on how they're doing. And then the team meets at the end of the day so that we can make sure we're all on the same page of who's doing what and what needs to be done, and everybody, nothing was missed. It's really the way I wish that healthcare was for all of us. If you could go to one spot and everybody coordinated and talked together. It's unfortunate that you have to have an ALS or some other really serious diagnosis to be able to get this multidisciplinary care. But it brings it all to one single location and gets everybody talking together, which is important. The ALS clinics, the research has shown that regularly attending ALS clinic can extend life by up to 12 months, and it will improve the quality of life ratings for the person who's living with ALS, as well as their caregivers and family members. So this is a huge, huge link to being able to support people with ALS and their families. And the association recognizes that, and therefore we invest in providing accessible transportation for people who are not able to acquire their own van. At no cost, we will get them to and from their clinics because we understand how important it is for them to be able to continue to engage in that healthcare. We also run a medical equipment loan program. Durable medical equipment is absolutely integral to maintaining safety and independence for someone living with ALS. Some equipment is covered by insurance, and sometimes there's generally there's a 20% copay with Medicare. So if they don't have a supplemental, there's going to be a 20% copay on a customized power wheelchair that may cost $25,000 to $30,000. Obviously, if someone is able to afford it, it's best case scenario for them to get that customized equipment on their own through their insurance. That is going to be built and designed exactly for them. So that's the best case scenario. That's not an option for everyone, or sometimes they might need equipment before the Medicare guidelines say they technically qualify for it. So our loan program is there to step in if someone doesn't have insurance, if they're not able to make their copays, or if they don't medically qualify, but it's limiting their quality of life, then they can borrow things through our loan closet at no cost for as long as they need them. As I said, people who are traveling here either for just a visit or who are here seasonally are also eligible for our loan program. So we want to make sure that we're getting equipment to maintain that independence, safety, and quality of life into the hands as soon as possible. Respite care is a program where we provide funding to hire someone to come in to help the family. Generally, this looks like a break for the primary caregiver who's also maybe trying to work, maybe trying to raise kids, also trying to take care, you know, of the requirements of just running a household. And so this is a good way to bring somebody in to be with their loved one, to make sure they stay safe while you go get your hair cut and get the oil changed in the car and pick up groceries and things like that. A lot of the home deliveries and things have made it a lot easier lately, especially, you know, that was sped up through and made more commonplace through COVID, but there is still the things that people need to be able to leave the house to do. As I talked about a little bit earlier, ALS is a rare disease. Most clinicians will never have worked with someone with ALS, and in their schooling, they will have a chapter on ALS potentially. So it's really important to make sure that when you are getting questions answered and having consultations, that you're consulting with a nurse who understands ALS. Every nurse may not understand ALS. Every physical therapist may not understand ALS. So when I talk to somebody and they tell me the physical therapist gave me the squeeze ball and these weights to work out with, I say, okay, we need to call the physical therapist. They don't have any concept of what's happening here because there is no way to re-strengthen those muscles. Once again, it's that electrical connection. So that's a lot of what we do, is educating care providers, both the family care providers, but as well as the home health and or the out-of-home placement. If someone chooses to live in a group home or in a independent or assisted living type facility, we can go in and provide education to those caregivers so that we make sure everybody's getting the appropriate care that they need. So our staff does care consultations. This is how we prefer to meet with families and register them. When we get a referral, we immediately try to go out and meet with them in person to help care plan. And so that's usually a 2-hour meeting to get to know them and their family and things that are important to them, and then start saying, these are the services available. What all can we put in place to help support you? We also maintain, as I said, because of the clinicians, we maintain contracts with several specialists who have knowledge in ALS. One of those is a nurse. There's a picture there of our nurse, Janie. And she's been an ALS nurse for 10 plus years, and now she contracts with us so that we can refer any nursing related questions to her. I'm not a nurse, my staff is not a nurse, so we make sure that we're getting them to her. Oh, excuse me. We also have a contract with a PhD licensed counselor who can do short-term counseling services for people with ALS and or their families, and how to cope with this, especially with people who are newly diagnosed. And she does a lot of counseling with people who are facing the end of their life and trying to make those advanced planning decisions about what they do and don't want, you know, their care at the end of their life to look like. We also contract with a certified child life specialist. She works full-time at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and she contracts with us to provide counseling and education services to parents and grandparents who don't know what to tell their kids or how to tell their loved ones, the youth in their family, what this means and what this looks like and how to explain that to them. So she can also do some family intervention. She's even sat through some and facilitated conversations with parents who didn't feel like they could tell their kids on their own. So we'll skip over to the children's program first. So we have, along with the child life therapist, we have a program for youth ages 6 through 18 who have a loved one with ALS. They're most likely never going to meet someone else who is another kid who is watching a loved one go through ALS and live with the realities of ALS. And so we do quarterly and monthly support groups for them, and then we do quarterly fun events and teen adventure days and things like that to get the youth together so that they can build bonds with other kids who understand and build that support system that they're going to need. And then the Living with ALS program is an adaptive recreation and leisure program that helps people with ALS, as well as their families, build memories and maintain that higher quality of life. This is where I was alluding to. I moved here to play golf. How can I continue to play golf? So we do an adaptive golf clinic. You can see there's adaptive fishing going on there. We do adaptive horseback riding. We had an adaptive water sports day. So we try to include all of the recreation and leisure activities that are common to Arizonans, and find a way to keep those families engaged. so that they can have that quality of life and build those memories with their loved ones. We also focus on community awareness and fundraising. Obviously, we are supported by grants, foundations, donations. We don't receive any federal funding, and we don't receive any insurance funding. We don't bill any insurance for any of our services. So we obviously have to do some fundraising, but we also, it's very important to us to do community awareness just to continue to spread the message about what ALS is. So I appreciate Emily including us on this. Was there a question, Emily? Can I keep going? Okay. One of those events is the Walk to Defeat ALS. We have 2 of these, and we'll get to a slide that talks about that. We have one in Tucson and one that's in the valley here. And the walk is a great opportunity to bring people with ALS together, as well as people who've lost their loved ones to ALS, to remember those that we've lost, and to celebrate the lives that they lived, and also to raise funds and awareness so that we can continue to support the people who are living with ALS right now and support the research to find a cure, to find treatments and a cure for this. So those are one of our biggest fundraisers and largest events. We have what is a bite night gala. So top chefs from around the valley come together. They create a signature dish, and the attendees get to, it's a fun opportunity to get together and to get to go around and try a lot of culinary bites. That would be the bite part of that from the top chefs around the valley. And then the chefs are all competing for the best bite, and it's a giant fork. And so everybody who attends and gets to sample all the food, then we all vote on who gets the best bite. So it's a fun competitive night that we enjoy, that also raises a lot of funds. And then we also have third-party events. So these are going to be events where someone might come to us and say, I want to host a golf fundraiser. I want to host a fishing tournament. I want to host an event that, that me and my network will plan and implement. And we have support staff who can help figure this out and make this happen. And then they donate those funds back to us as well. So you can see there's pictures of a couple of events there. The top right family in the gray shirt, where there's the 4 of them holding the check. Scott, who's there, the second one from the left, Scott was a huge fisherman and is a huge fisherman, and he was diagnosed with ALS. And so he said, okay, I want to make a fishing tournament. He knew about fishing tournament, and that's what he does. And so last year they had their first fishing tournament, and it was wonderful, and they plan to grow on that this year. So that's an example of a third-party event. So for anyone who may be interested, how you can get involved and join us in the fight. We have the Walks to Defeat ALS. There's one in Scottsdale and Tucson. We have Bite Night. We need people to attend. We also need people to volunteer at both of those events. And then the Living with ALS. We love to have volunteers come out who want to interact with people with living with ALS, to come out and help facilitate those. Usually it requires a couple volunteers for each person with ALS who's engaging. But it's a fun day to be able to help somebody continue to maintain or to experience the things that they enjoy. So we also have volunteers who participate in our advocacy outreach efforts. We have people who participate in admin. So if you're interested in getting involved as a volunteer, we would love to have your help in that way. And you can see it's sort of grayed out on our website, but our website is alsaz.org. I think that it's changing. I think it's now als.org/az, but if you type this in, it will redirect you. So just stick with the alsaz.org, and you can see on the right side there is how you can volunteer with us and submit a volunteer form there. If you're interested in supporting us through financial efforts, you can make a one-time donation there at our website, or by sending or mailing things to our office. You can be an ALS ally by a monthly donation. A lot of employers have matching gifts, and we have a lot of people who participate in the matching gift program. Or you can support while you shop by linking your Kroger Community Rewards account to the ALS Association, or your smile.amazon.com. So those are all just ways that people can get involved. And then if all else fails and you just want to know more and support us, you can also follow us on social media. If you do Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of those things, you can see a lot of our events and programs that are going on there through social media. And we love to have people just help spread the word. So I mean, that is a huge way to help support us by continuing to get the message out. And social media, it makes a huge difference for all companies, but especially for nonprofits these days. Okay, so, and you can see my contact information is there. Feel free to email me. It's amy@alsaz.org if you have any questions or concerns, or you can reach out via our main line. So I'll go ahead and leave this up. And then Emily, do we have other questions?
So I don't
Things I
see
missed?
any. Yeah, I don't see any other questions that people have typed in.
Okay.
I so appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. It was great when you came to my office a couple of years ago and we could sit down and chat in person about the association and all the services that it provides. You know, it is, as you said, a rare disease, even though so many people are diagnosed. So even in my own career that spans 25, 26 years, I've only had a handful of clients where we've done some estate planning and all-text planning for the diagnosis. So thank you for all the work that you guys do, all the wonderful free services that you're able to provide because of the support you have behind you, and for giving up some time today and putting this together. So I look forward to working with you again. Thank you for all of the folks who stayed on and asked such fantastic questions. And we'll look forward to talking with you soon. So thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate you having us and helping us spread the news or spread the message about ALS. And I also appreciate you being a referral, you know, so that I've actually given your name out to somebody last week. So thank you for the support that you provide to our families and helping with the planning that they need.
Yeah, we're all in it together. Everybody needs more than one. So
absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Well, you take care. Everybody take care of yourselves, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.